The first time the letter arrived, I thought it was a joke. A neatly folded envelope slid under my door in the middle of a sweltering July afternoon, stamped with the seal of the Homeowners Association. Inside, in their usual cold and pompous tone, the HOA demanded that I shut down my private well. My well. The one I had dug with my own money years before I even moved into this neighborhood. The water that ran through it had kept my garden alive, filled my pool, and spared me from the insane water bills that everyone else complained about. And now, out of nowhere, they had decided it was a problem. Unauthorized groundwater extraction, they called it. But I knew the truth. They didn't care about rules. They cared about control. I laughed at first, tossed the letter aside, and went back to watering my lawn. But that was the last time my lawn saw water for weeks, because the very next morning, men in reflective vests showed up and chained my well shut. They had backup from the city inspector, who nodded along as the HOA president. A smug man named Carl, with perfectly combed gray hair and a golf visor he wore like a crown, stood there smiling. "No more stealing from the community," he said, loud enough for my neighbors to hear. I remember the way his lips curled, like he'd already won a war I hadn't even agreed to fight. But what Carl and his army of clipboard warriors didn't know was this: I don't give up. Ever. Especially not when someone tries to humiliate me. Especially not when they mess with my property, my freedom, and my pride. They thought shutting down my well was the end. They were dead wrong. That was just the beginning. Here's where things started to twist. At the HOA's monthly meeting, Carl boasted about how my well water ban was a victory for fairness. He bragged about how his beloved golf course, the neighborhood's crown jewel, needed every drop of water it could get. He wasn't hiding it. He had essentially stolen my water rights just to keep his golf course green. And as he bragged, I realized something. The same underground water system that fed my well also fed their precious golf course. My water was their water. And without my contribution, without the balance of my well, the course was vulnerable. Very vulnerable. That's when the idea hit me. Sharp, dangerous, and impossible to resist. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to make sure their golf course dried out to dust. But I couldn't just walk in and flip a switch. That would be too obvious. I needed patience. I needed precision. And I needed to make them believe their downfall was completely natural. So I started small. I knew the irrigation system for the course was temperamental, and the HOA had cut corners maintaining it. Late at night, I began monitoring the water flow, slipping past fences under the cover of darkness, listening to the creaks and gurgles of the old pipes. I documented every weakness, every vulnerable point, every valve that could be nudged just enough to fail without leaving fingerprints. Meanwhile, the HOA didn't stop tormenting me. They fined me for weeds in my front yard, never mind that the weeds only showed up because I couldn't water anymore. They threatened me over the color of my mailbox. They even sent a violation notice claiming my trash cans were 2 inches too far from the curb. Each fine, each petty letter fueled the fire inside me. I stopped seeing them as a board of homeowners. They became my enemy, my target. And then, one night, it happened. The perfect storm. A heat wave rolled in, pushing temperatures over 100 for days. The grass on the golf course turned from emerald to pale straw, thirsting for water. I knew they'd crank up their irrigation system, desperate to save it. That was my moment. I slipped into the maintenance shed with gloves and a flashlight. I didn't sabotage the system outright, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I adjusted a single valve, redirecting the pressure. Enough to strain the pumps, enough to make the sprinklers spray unevenly, leaving dry patches in all the wrong places. At first, the changes were subtle. A brown spot here, a wilted patch there. But then, like dominoes falling, the course began to wither. Every morning, Carl stomped around in disbelief, waving his arms at groundskeepers, demanding answers. They dumped more water, more chemicals, more money into it, but nothing worked. The more they fought, the faster it died. That's when the whispers started. Neighbors began to notice that while their water bills skyrocketed, the golf course was still failing. Some even suggested Carl had mismanaged funds. I watched from my porch, pretending to be another helpless resident while the cracks in their empire widened. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because here's the part no one saw coming. I had kept a secret reservoir. When they shut down my well, I didn't drain it. I redirected it into hidden tanks beneath my property. While the HOA gasped and begged the city for more water, my garden bloomed brighter than ever under the moonlight, fed by the very reserves they had tried to steal. And one morning, Carl snapped. He stormed to my front door, sweat dripping from his visor, papers clutched in his trembling hands. "What did you do?" he demanded. I played dumb. "Maybe the earth just got tired of your golf course," I said, smiling as I closed the door in his face. But the climax came at the HOA's annual showcase, when they invited city officials to admire their pristine golf course. By then, it wasn't just dead. It was a wasteland. Cracked soil, brittle grass, sprinklers sputtering mud. The officials were horrified. The HOA's reputation crumbled in real time. And Carl? He lost everything. His position, his pride, his power. As for me, I sat on my porch that evening, sipping a glass of cold water from my hidden well, watching the sun set over a dead golf course. They thought they could ban my water. Instead, I drained their empire dry. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Because while the golf course dried out, while the HOA collapsed, something strange began happening underground. The redirected water I had stored, it wasn't just sustaining me. It was spreading, quietly feeding into parts of the neighborhood no one had cared about. Lawns that had been dead for years suddenly turned green again. Trees that had withered sprouted leaves. Neighbors who had once sided with Carl now turned to me, whispering about how I had done the impossible. I became a legend. The man who outsmarted the HOA. The man who dried out the golf course but brought life back to the forgotten corners of the neighborhood. And every time someone asked me how I did it, I just smiled and said, "Sometimes you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with drought."